So Josie and I are going to walk you through a little bit of a journey here from policy to practice in our journey in the Sea to Sky School District when it comes to circle process, restorative practice, etc.
Yeah, I'm Josie Moore, and I'm the coordinator for Restorative Practices in School District 48. So before we dive in, I just wanted to preface with the flow of the circle. And this comes from the work of Dr. Evelyn Zellerer from Peace of the Circle, who has been our guide, facilitator, really mentor as we implement these practices in our district. I would encourage you to check out her website, Peace of the Circle. She's fabulous and a wonderful human being. So this is the flow of a circle that we use regularly, and we are going to kind of guide you through this. We don't have time to dive into every aspect, but we just wanted to sort of lead with this, and we'll also close with it so you can sort of see all the different aspects, and we will make sure we touch on all of them. So we always start with a welcome and some sort of opening activity. And then a values exercise, which Cory will chat about. I'll talk about guidelines. And then we'll also sort of build in an intro and check-in. And then our dialogue, which is sort of the central part, tailored to the purpose. And then we'll finish with a checkout and a closing. So that's sort of just how the flow will go.
Sea to Sky School District is located and honored to be on the lands of the Skohomish, Liwat, Naquaqua, and Shamaquan people, or Lower Statlian people. And I'm calling in from the traditional territory of the Skohomish people, actually just right adjacent to the village of Statmis, which is the oldest village of the Skohomish people. We actually can walk straight from our school right to Totem Hall and go visit the elders for tea, which is a lovely, lovely place to be. And it's important when you're doing circles, even if it's a brief acknowledgement, something to situate yourself to place. It grounds us in who we are and where we live. And I'm gonna give you a chance to share a bit about where you're from in a second. But before we do that, I'm gonna share with you a video clip from Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers is kind of like, I was on the cusp of a Mr. Rogers kid. I was born in the 80s. I watched a bit of Mr. Rogers. I really actually came to appreciate Mr. Rogers more when I became an educator. And there's a great book called If You Wonder You're Learning. I can't remember the exact title, but it follows the pedagogy of Mr. Rogers and how he was such a pioneer when it came to education and children's shows. But he does a really nice job of helping ground us in our values. And so by way of us doing a welcome, a check-in, an opening, and our values, I'm going to show you this video clip. And Josie and I chose to do this all together because circle is a flow. You don't have to do a welcome. You don't have to say, here's our welcome, here's our check-in, here's our opening, here's our values. You can blend them together. So what I'd like you to do, I'm going to play this video, and I want you to reflect on Mr. Rogers' words, and then we'll have a couple questions for you. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So in his speech here, he gets up in a very much Mr. Rogers fashion. Instead of him talking about his accomplishments, he's asking us in this moment to take 10 seconds to think about someone special in your life, someone that loved you into being, that cared for you. 10 seconds of silence. And then he'll say he'll watch the time. And then, so what I want you to do is spend 10 seconds thinking about someone important in your life, someone that helped love you into being. And then Mr. Rogers says, whoever you've been thinking about, how happy they must feel to know the difference that they made in your life. And so when starting circle, it's so important to bring those values to the center, because at the end of the day, being in circle is about connection. It's about connection and belonging. And in our school system, connection and belonging isn't another thing on your plate. It is the plate. It holds everything together. So if you feel comfortable, circle is also an invitation. We don't force things in circle. It's a flow. So I did a circle a couple weeks ago in a classroom where I used this Mr. Rogers video, and it was a circle around classroom culture. I used this Mr. Rogers video, and I invited the students to bring that special person into circle with them. And it was pretty powerful. Kids sharing about their grandmother and how important education was to her, bringing in cousins and friends. And then I encouraged them to think about those people sitting in circle with you. How would they feel? How would they want you to respond to these questions in circle? And as we are inviting these people into our conversation today, I want you to be thinking about that as well. How would your mom want you to show up? What values would she want you to be expressing? What are you bringing from your ancestors into this conversation? Because we're all here because of our ancestors. Now that we've placed our values at the center, we've done our bit of a quick check-in, we can get into our guidelines.
So I'm just going to chat briefly about guidelines, which are really how we determine how we are all going to be together in circle. And typically we co-create these with the folks that are in circle to ensure that the guidelines are meeting the needs of the people that are there at that moment, acknowledging that everybody is coming with different needs, and also they might require something different in order to show up and be present in a good way. So this would happen near the beginning of any restorative circle or really any circle at all. And of course, the guidelines are going to be tailored to the purpose, like everything. But we generally will pose a question along the lines of this: what, if anything, do you need in order to participate and be present today? And, with students, we'll probably dig into that a little bit. What does it mean to be present? What are we expecting in terms of participation? And then give a little bit of time for folks to think, and then go around and ask everyone what they need in order to participate. And these could be, what do they physically need, movement breaks, access to water, to know where the washroom is. Some folks might say, I need to keep my phone on me because I'm running a school, or we've had, RCMP or first responders in circle. They need to stay connected in case anything happens. And so not only is this practically really important, but it can also really build empathy for what everyone in the circle is experiencing and provide a little perspective on what they might need to show up in a good way, acknowledging that we're all different. And in co-creating it, it gives a sense of shared ownership over it, which gets a lot more buy-in. I've especially experienced this with students where they might be struggling to be in a good way in circle. Once we've co-created this, they have a little more buy-in. And I always keep the guidelines visible during circle so we can refer back to them. And if I'm working with a group of students or a same group over, I will make sure to review the guidelines at the beginning of every circle every time we're together. So we're not going to go through this process together right now. We don't have time, but this is just something that we like to highlight because it is a really crucial part of making sure the process goes well. Without guidelines, you can encounter a lot of bumps along the way, and certainly you still will, but having the guidelines will really help you. You can always come back to that and have something that everyone has agreed to at the very beginning of the process. Yeah.
And something I just want to add with guidelines as well too is guidelines can also be very strategic, especially in a restorative circle. So you as a circle keeper, and part of your work is pre-conferencing, meeting with people, you're going to be asking those questions in advance as well. What might you need? And so prompting people prior to a circle and encouraging them to openly express their needs. And as Josie said, will build empathy. So if you're dealing in a circle where maybe trust is broken, you could be encouraging through the pre-conference process, like perhaps you need to ask for trust to be part of a guideline. And so it can be strategic in that sense as well too. So part of what we wanted to talk about here today is a bit of that journey that we went on as a school district, moving from policy to practice. And I think that for our work, we've always been, as a district, like restorative practice has been a big part of what we do. But where things have really taken off for us is that we've embedded it into our policies. It's all in our code of conducts across the board at all of our schools. But we started by turning to our Leewat and Squamish ways of knowing, being, and doing, really grounded in Indigenous pedagogy. Evelyn has this beautiful line that I'm going to paraphrase it, but that circle is for everyone. All people inherit circle in some capacity. For example, I'm walking across my office. I have a prop. I'm a bit of a prop comic. I'm like Carrot Top, but we all at some point, our ancestors sat around a campfire. We all sat around, we shared stories, we solved conflicts. And so we all have a stake in circle, but Indigenous people have held it. Oh, Josie's got one too. My wife made them for Josie and I. Indigenous people have held the practice. And so it's important for us to be really lifting that up and elevating our Indigenous people as the keepers. But we all have some stake in circle. It's embedded in our district education plan. It really flows from the School Act, though. And for administrators that are on this call, highlighting the fact that restorative practice flows from the School Act. If you refer to the safe, caring, orderly schools, which all codes of conduct flow from, there's a line that's really powerful that says codes of conduct should be, or when incidents happen in school, kids should be part of the conversation. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but it's that idea that even in the early 2000s, when this document came out, educators at the time knew that kids needed to be part of the conversation when it comes to restoring harm that was caused. I've taken that a step further and saying, well, then we need to co-construct in the moment as well, too. Part of our work in the Sea to Sky School District has really been a work around suspension rates and kind of tackling our suspension rates, which were a decade ago very high and have dropped significantly since then. Part of that is through restorative work and a lot of our structures as well too. We did work with Well Ahead. All principals and vice principals have received some level of circle training, except for maybe one or two new ones. We spent a lot of time grant writing, and I'll let Josie actually talk about. Josie, you want to just jump in and talk about the grant writing real quick?
Yeah, so Cory and I believe Phil and other folks before, Phil Clark, who is our Director of Learning Services, have been working hard over the last few years to be awarded the civil forfeiture grants. We reapplied this year and we should be hearing back in May, but those take the proceeds of crime and channel it back into programs such as this. So that's been a really crucial way that we've been able to fund the trainings that we do, which I'll talk about in a little while, and also other roles in the district, such as mine, and a lot of the important work we do through grants.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it's just kind of logistically thinking about how can your district leverage restorative practice, and funds is something that always comes up. Of course, our district has been very supportive as well too, in terms of funding for roles and for trainings, but that grant writing has been crucial in providing an additional revenue stream for us. And I would encourage people to apply. The civil forfeiture grant process is pretty straightforward. Policy, like I mentioned, policy has been updated, so our codes of conduct all must contain restorative approaches within it. And our mental health in school strategy, which we worked on with the coaching program here, has also taken an element of circle and restorative practice. And then finally, a relatively new position that started, well, very new, that started last 2 years, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, is having a spot on our instructional leadership team dedicated to restorative practice. So a couple of years ago, I held that as part of my portfolio, and you have this opportunity to travel the district and really elevate circle as a process. And that's Josie's role right now. So I'll actually let Josie speak to what that looks like currently.
Thank you. Yes, so this is my first year on the instructional leadership team for the school district, and we are a group of educators from across the district with experience in all different elements of education, and we all hold various portfolios, and mine is restorative practices. So I'm the coordinator for restorative practices, and it is a 0.4 temporary role. And so I have 2 days a week where I travel throughout the district. Like Cory said, we are a rural district. So this afternoon I'm heading to Whistler. On Thursday, I'm heading to Pemberton. But really, I try to make an effort to connect with folks in all 15 of our schools and just offer support, guidance on their restorative journeys. So that can look different every day. It looks completely different. Right after this, I'm heading into a class to facilitate a community building circle about personal values. And then in the afternoon, I'm heading into an English First Peoples 10 class to run an empathy interview process through Circle with a grade 10 English First Peoples course. Last week, I was facilitating a more restorative circle about some vandalism that had happened. So it's really varied. I'll meet with educators for an afternoon. We can offer release time and meet and just share knowledge and exchange information about restorative practices and circle and look at ways they can embed that in their practice. And then in this role, I also help plan for and facilitate the circle trainings with Dr. Evelyn Zeller. So she is the primary facilitator. She is a wealth of knowledge, but we are sort of the boots on the ground to ensure that we are getting folks that are already doing this or want to learn more, and sort of finding folks that are already doing this and want to participate in the training. It is pretty comprehensive training. There's one coming up in a few weeks. So gathering those folks, organizing release time, all the logistics that go into having, 15 educators gather for 3 days. That sort of falls under this umbrella as well. And lots of other things too. It's pretty full on. But it's wonderful, and it's so fantastic that our district is acknowledging the importance of this by funding a role. I think that it really is starting to pay off dividends. I see Circle happening all the time, and just for educators, administrators as well, to feel like they have someone they can bounce ideas off of, or if there is a higher level situation going on, we can come in and either co-lead the Circle or lead the Circle ourselves. And I just wanted to also mention, when it comes to policy, because I do work as the Indigenous Student Success Advisor as well at our high school, where I support our Indigenous students there to be successful in school, that restorative practices are also embedded in our protocol agreement with the Squamish Nation. So it actually says that, we as the school district agree to the continued development of restorative processes to deal with Squamish Nation students who may breach school district rules and policies, and also the use of informal and formal processes that precede wrongdoing, those that proactively build relationships and a sense of community to prevent conflict and wrongdoing. So particularly when working with our Indigenous students, we actually have a requirement from our protocol agreement to use restorative approaches, which I think is wonderful. Yeah.
And when that is done judiciously, when we follow that protocol agreement, things are so much better for our kids. I had one a few weeks back with a young man where I followed the protocol agreement. I followed this. That's just how I would go about it anyway. I followed the steps. I did the restorative work, and it really helped repair. And when I had that hard conversation with the Squamish Nation, because that happens when their kids are missing school for various reasons, and I was able to walk them through the process, they were nothing but appreciative and super supportive as well too. And it's paid off for that young man quite a bit. So next is, I mentioned this before, but thinking about how our policy shapes our practice when it comes to Circle, having a solid bedrock in policy is really important. So this is from the Safe and Caring Schools. This is kind of more ministry level, but you can distill from that we actually have a responsibility to create systems that allow for conversations around things like discrimination, bullying, and harassment. And at a later slide, I'm going to ask you a question that I won't reveal just yet, but it's related to this, where we're really thinking about what the alternative to something like Circle could be. And I'll leave that there. Okay, this slide here. This slide generates typically a lot of conversations in our school district, and that's around our suspension rate. So you see in 2009, 2010, suspension rates, suspending well over 200 kids, and then a really precipitous drop. That drop can be attributed to a lot of things, but in particular, our superintendent at the time, Lisa McCullough, embraced things like restorative practice and made it really clear that we needed to do a better job of holding on to our kids, thinking about Neufeld and Ross Green, holding on to our kids. And so us as administrators, and I came into administration kind of, I was a teacher in the early 2000s, or early 2010s, and then got into administration 2015, 2016, but was working in schools during that dip. And it was really this push for us as a system to look at things differently. And you can imagine that those suspensions, the students that were suspended, are typically the kids that are at the margins. So they were Indigenous students and students with some sorts of disabilities, learning differences. And so we as a system said that we got to actually do something different. And with our suspension rate, correlation does not necessarily mean causation. We also had a significant increase in our grad rates. And actually, I popped that one off the slide for some reason. I don't have it here, but our grad rates also jumped up. So for us, restorative practice was really about um, doing something different, not just sending kids home for a vacation, because typically that's what suspension is, thinking about that process of accountability and bringing kids back in a good way. Josie, is there anything you want to add to that one? I think you're going to share an example perhaps of a circle that we did.
Cory and I collaborated on a circle, and we had a situation at the school where some students made a bad choice, and pretty significant damage was done to the building, the structure, like in the thousands of dollars. And it was a really challenging situation. Many folks were impacted, maintenance, first responders. No one was injured, but there was a lot of damage to the building. And it was a really challenging situation to navigate. It was a group of Indigenous students who I was supporting at the time as a success advisor, actually. And we really wanted to ensure that they were able to acknowledge the damage that had been caused and also find ways to make it right and move forward in a good way. And it was quite powerful because they were initially suspended. The school made the decision to do a suspension while the situation was unfolding. But it was made really clear, and I was communicating to families who were quite upset about how things were going in their opinion and wanting to ensure that their children, even though they were involved, were, being taken care of and dealt with respectfully. And we made it really clear that the suspension was just a pause so that this restorative process could take place. The suspension wasn't the punishment, it wasn't the end goal. It was just a temporary measure so that we could do the important work, because this is time consuming. Cory put many, many hours into preparing for a restorative practice, pre-conferencing with everybody, getting the truth out of everyone, making sure that all the folks who needed to be there were there, the head of maintenance for the school district, etc. But when we came together, when all that work had been done and we came together in a good way, the circle was really powerful. And everybody, parents, guardians, the students, administrators, were able to share their piece. And I think everyone understood that the intention was so that the students could return in a good way and feel good about themselves at school, not that they have some mark on them for something that they had done, and that they could work to truly make it right. So that was an example of a circle that was extremely effective. Yeah.
And that circle in particular, and actually most circles, it's a moment in time. So you have a choice. We have a choice of, do we turn our backs on these kids that made a mistake and take a really punitive approach that is ultimately just going to cause shame and enhance a negative image that they may already have of themselves? Or do we use it as an opportunity to create the space for accountability? You don't get to walk away from an incident like that without being accountable, but also lift them up at the same time, because there's no throwaway kids. Kids make mistakes, kids mess up, adults as well too. And so circle is really about everyone has value no matter what they have done. And so for us as educators, that's our moral obligation. We have to do this. That is the work. And it doesn't mean that kids can do whatever they want. There's no accountability. In fact, circle is the exact opposite. Accountability is way higher in our school district than it's ever been, because going through that process is much more intense than just taking a week vacation at home to play video games. Bringing kids back in and having to sit across from the people that were harmed and talk about that harm is much more powerful. And so for those students in particular, it had a really positive effect on their schooling. It had a really positive effect. And Josie was there to work through that with them as well too.
Cory, can I add one more
Yeah,
thing
of course. Yeah.
That I think with this particular example really sticks out for me, was a huge teaching for me, was the folks that were there to support the students, their guardians. They were coming with their own lived experiences of school. And I think from what they shared in the circle, some of them had had a really challenging time in school. And of course, that was impacting the way that they were protecting their children. They were prepared that their children were going to have the same experience that they had had. And I think when we all went through the process together, it was actually very healing for them. There was a lot of emotion on the part of some of the guardians from their own lived experience. And I have gone on now to work with those families for 4 more years. And I can really see that circle as a pivotal moment when there was some trust built. And they have younger siblings coming up, and we're so ingrained with the community, and that's really when the work really also starts to pay off, when you see that relationship and the trust really grow with the families as well.
Yeah, thanks, Josie. Just put it up here for you to look at our board's vision when it comes to well-being, and also our mental health in schools strategic plan. And I won't read them out, but you can, reading between the lines, things like connection, belonging, enhancing well-being. When we talk about these statements, in the back of my mind at least, and many of my colleagues, circle forms a key layer in this plan. Because in order to create connection and belonging, we have to create the space to have open, honest conversations with each other. When we were doing our vision planning for mental health in school strategy, last year, yeah, over the last couple of years, I helped lead that through Circle. So we'd bring together our stakeholder groups, our teachers union and QP staff, and at the time, as the president of the Principal Vice Principal Association, and using Circle to flatten hierarchy so that you can have an actual conversation about well-being was so impactful. That teachers could feel like they could have a conversation with the administration, that myself as the president of the Principal Vice Principal Association could express the needs of the members of my association as well too. And it was this moment in time that was really heartfelt, heartfelt opportunity. So we use Circle as a key layer of us doing our mental health and school strategic plan. But that being said, we vision everything as a circle, just not all the time. There's a time and a place for Circle, and of course, as a practice, it's something we lean into heavily. But it's not always the right thing to do. But you can still use Circle as a background for your structures. So, for example, in education leadership meetings, principal vice principal meetings, quite often done in our district through Circle, or Circle is a practice that we utilize. Our leadership learning network, which is again for principals and vice principals. Last year in particular, I ran that all through Circle. We met in Circle as school district administrators to talk about the issues and challenges in our district. Many staff meetings across our district are done in Circle. My staff meeting here at StatMIS is done exclusively through Circle. At StatMIS as well, I've shifted staff committee from this, I would call, antagonistic process where a union rep or two meets with an administrator to talk about the issues. Instead, I run a staff circle where we openly talk about what's going on. Already mentioned mental health in schools. And then, of course, we use Circle for things like conflict and curriculum. And I'm just checking the next slide here. Josie, is there anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, maybe just quickly a few other instances where we have been starting to implement Circle. Community care plan meetings. I've been a part of a few recently that have been very effective run as a Circle. And also IEP meetings. And I believe we have a resource slide, but something that we always suggest, I was looking around the room, there's usually a copy in every office at every school of the book Circle Forward, but there isn't one here, and I actually usually carry mine around and I lent it out to someone. Oh yeah, Cory has one. It's sort of a running joke, but they're being used, which is fabulous. And it has, I would say, upwards of 100, 150 outlines for circles for pretty much every purpose you could imagine. One of my favorites is the class that ate the sub. So if you were a classroom teacher and you returned and you had some unfortunate notes from your substitute teacher, you could do a process with the students to talk about what happened. So it's expensive, but it is a great resource, and we have copies circulating all over the district and they're getting used, which is wonderful. So just to draw your attention to that.
This is kind of the key question in talking about Circle. If not this, then what? Thinking about the School Act, thinking about codes of conduct, thinking about our obligation to keep kids in school, learning in school. If not this, then what? What other tools do we have in our toolbox to address harm, to address culture, to address values in our schools? And so I really want people to be reflecting on that question of, if not this, then what? What is the alternative? Because the alternative is a really traditional approach of suspending a kid and then they come back and the behavior just repeats. Or coming in and removing a couple of kids from a classroom, and then that behavior repeats elsewhere. And so really thinking about that, if not this, then what? And we're going to kind of blast through things a little bit faster here. I'm going to play this video in the background, and then maybe Josie, could you just speak to that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So sort of looking for spaces in our schools and our communities even where we can facilitate circles. We know that our schools are full. Our schools up here are bursting at the seams. So we often hear from teachers that they really love circle, but especially middle high school, it starts to get tricky with the spaces. So we've been trying to find spaces where we can and put this in the center, and this is literally in the center of the school I'm at right now. We were doing a courtyard renovation and collaborating on a project with community partners, and decided to arrange the seating in a circle just to utilize that as a space. And we've been sort of carving out little corners. I've set up a few restorative corners at schools where that can be a dedicated space for this to happen, which has been quite effective. Yeah.
And at that particular school, Don Ross, I was principal there a few years back. Part of this process Josie and I worked on. We also reimagined the physical structure within the building. So tearing down walls, connecting classrooms together through sliding doors to create more space for connection to be happening. And so our school really, and my school in particular here at Statmas also has that. I have a dedicated room for Circle, which I'm very fortunate to have, but Circle happens in every single classroom. And what you're just seeing is a time lapse of a mural that we had put up, which is pretty nice. Okay. Circle's way of being, there's in my school here at Statmas, we start and end each week in Circle, the entire school, and bring the school together in the gym. And we share a song, and I talk about our values. So we have 3 school values. I talk about our values. Then we lead a song. It's beautiful. I might share a couple of announcements, but I tie everything back to our values. And at the end of the week, I have another circle, same process. We close the week. And so I really want the kids to see that our entire week is a circle. We have an opening and we have a closing. And in the center, our learning is that dialogue. And in the closing, we also celebrate students. So we're always celebrating students for their successes. At the end of the week, I'm celebrating staff. And then Josie's going to briefly speak to our training process. So I'll pass it on to Josie, and I'll just play this in the background.
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned, our district has had a ongoing partnership with Dr. Evelyn Zeller since, Cory, you would know, I want to say 2016. Yeah,
Something like
so
that, yeah.
going on 8 or 9 years now. And every round of training, we offer a space to about 15 educators, administrators. We always invite folks from the Squamish Nation and Lil'wat Nation, our partner nations, elders, knowledge holders, culture and language workers, educators, teachers. We pretty much have everyone who would like to join, and we find that's really important to have folks at all in all roles. And we have now over 70 folks who have received the training over the years. And we are moving into training folks on the deeper dive training, the level 2 training. We're just about to have our second group go through that in a few weeks. And again, that is funded a lot through the grants, but also the district is quite supportive of that work. And we're working towards building a team at each school. So right now we have between 2 and 8 folks who've done the training in all of our buildings. And I'm working at partnering with those teams to just ensure they feel supported and see if there's any other resources I can provide, but the training is ongoing. Yeah.
And what's nice as well is we built so much capacity in our district, and we leverage our partnership with Dr. Zeller because she is phenomenal. But we've built so much capacity in our district that we're also starting to offer on our own as well too. We offer training sessions, either ad hoc or a bit more formal through Pro D days, more for like the level 1 kind of surface level trainings. But I share in every single training that I've participated in recently a message to staff that take the training that ultimately with Circle, just do it. You're just try it. When we started Circle, there was no training. We had a book, we had a sheet that we went off of, and ultimately at the end of the day, Circle is a structured conversation amongst human beings. And it doesn't have to be any more complex than that. If you follow the peace flow process, the Circle goes a lot better. But if you're just creating space for people to have an honest conversation, you're doing Circle in a good way. I've never seen in my time, a bad circle. I've seen circles kind of go sideways, but the intent is always good, which is important. This next slide here, Josie, just talking a bit about our interventions. And so I'll let Josie walk you through this here.
Yeah, I'll just chat through this quickly because there's a lot of information on here, and I believe we can share the slides afterwards if folks want to take a better look at this. But really, this is just showing that when we think about restorative interventions, we can think of it in 3 tiers. So the bottom tier, tier 1, is sort of our universal, proactive and preventative, sort of the day-to-day community building circles, creating community agreements, social emotional learning programs. That is our foundation. To promote positive culture and attempt to prevent conflicts before they arise by giving people tools. And then looking at tier 2, that's a little more targeted and responsive. So if there's an emerging conflict or harmful behavior that is going on, we would like to use this here to aim to restore a relationship through a structured conversation. So I think about a circle I was in last week where there was some racist language being used, and we wanted to address it, but we didn't want to be punitive. So, and it's been helpful in starting a conversation about that in the classroom. And then the tier 3 is really the individualized restorative justice focus. So for incidents of serious or repeated harm that are aiming to restore trust, repair harm, and reintegrate the person or persons. So the example that Cory and I shared, where there was serious harm done to the physical building, that would sort of fall into that category. And you can see that the hope is that by focusing on the tier 1, where the majority of our work really falls, then that will hopefully lead to less need for tier 2 and tier 3. But when they are needed, we have the structures there. And then on the right is just some questions that you could ask when you are prepping for intensive restorative practice process to see if you are on track. And I'll just leave those there for you to read at a later time. Yeah.
I'm going to just go through really quickly a bit of data that's been collected over the last little bit here. This data I'll preface it, this data needs to be updated. I collected this during my time in Josie's role, as well as my time as principal of Don Ross Middle School. And you see some themes arise. So the tier 3 or even tier 2 circles, mostly peer conflict. Physical conflict was popping up quite a bit at the middle school, but you can see where a lot of our circles were. Myself and my vice principal at the time, Janelle Kresick, we had acknowledged that we were doing a really poor job when it came to restorative work with drugs and alcohol. And so it's something that we've been thinking a lot about. So how are we approaching that in a different way? And so it was kind of when we collected this data, we sat back and we're like, whoa, we need to do better with that. We need to do some better work with that. So there's some of the themes. And then asking the question around resolution. My framework for resolution was, did a circle happen and did we come to an agreement at the end? And so 93% of our circles came to some sort of agreement. 5 at the time were ongoing. And then if you ask the question around recidivism, so did the student or students repeat the behavior? And in 16% of the cases, the answer was yes. In a traditional model, you'd have to flip that. In a traditional suspension model, traditional punitive model, you would flip that. Recidivism rates 75, 80% typically. So a restorative approach is really effective in reducing recidivism when it comes to that particular incident. And so that's something that we are very pleased with.
I just wanted to mention that as part of the flow of a circle, we would always make sure that we have some sort of a checkout round. Sometimes if it's been sort of a heavy topic, it could be to sort of see how everybody is doing, but also I sometimes like to call it like a palate cleanser, especially if it's with a whole class of students, to just make sure that everyone gets sort of a final word, and hopefully it's positive. And then a closing could be something like a quote, or sometimes I do a short visualization. In certain instances, we finished with a smudge to sort of reset the energy. So just making sure that you are sending everyone off in a good way. We don't necessarily want to leave things open, knowing that, of course, things will continue on, but just for the flow of the circle. And then I think, Cory, if you go to the last slide, that's just showing the one we started with. So you can sort of see, we went really quickly through all of those